Hi, everybody. Mitch Tanenbaum here. Thanks for joining me today. This is the security news update for September 18th, 2022. On the security and privacy alert front, this hasn't been a great week for Uber. Uber's former chief information security officer is facing criminal charges. He's on trial for lying to everybody about a 2016 breach. Moral of that story, of course, is that a lot of times the cover up is worse than the crime. In this particular case, they paid off a hacker who broke in and called it a bug bounty. And then they didn't, for over a year, they didn't go off and bother to report the breach to anybody. I think apparently they've learned that lesson, but maybe not. They had a new breach which they announced this week, which apparently was a social engineering attack, totally compromise Uber's environment. And the challenge I have is if they shut their systems down, they're out of business. I mean, maybe not permanently, but they're out of business. And the challenge becomes, well, how do you go off and get a hacker out of your system when the systems are still up and online and connected to the internet? That's a real challenge. I want to see how they do that. The answer may be they won't do it terribly successfully, which of course the hackers would like because they could easily be one step ahead of them. But they've apparently shared screens of their AWS environment, their domain admin screens, and stuff like that. One reason probably why they're not lying about it is because the hackers were smart this time, and they shared these screenshots with the media, which of course was all over it, which made it very difficult for Uber to cover it up and lie, which is, they certainly have a history of doing. So from that perspective, we'll see, but at least it's out in public at this point. A new attack vector, and I really hadn't thought about this until I saw an article on it. In the work from home, work from anywhere world, employees are now viewing and downloading pirated content. Now they always were doing that, but now they're doing it during the day on their company-owned computers, and of course that pirated content most of the time contains malware. So hopefully your defenses are strong enough to detect that, but you really can't stop people from going to a website. I mean, maybe you can, but you can certainly reduce the odds if you severely restrict what websites people go to, but most companies aren't willing to do that. The employee relations part of that is not really going to work. So that's a new attack vector. If you need help with that, let us know. CISA is really going crazy on the IoT and industrial IoT vulnerability front, and they are announcing new vulnerabilities every single week. Sometimes as many as a dozen in a week. And the reality is that market is very immature. It's kind of where the computer to the PC and Mac market was in terms of vulnerability disclosure, maybe 10 or 20 years ago. This particular one has to do with a tank management system that's using critical infrastructure to tell them the status of holding tanks of different varieties. And apparently, the vendor says they're not going to go fix it. So that really puts the critical infrastructure operators in a really dicey position. They can either ignore it and leave those things running. They can make it not visible from the internet, which is a real problem for them operationally. Or they can replace the hardware, which is very expensive. My guess is most of the people are going to go off and choose the option, which is the least expensive one, which is pretend it doesn't exist and they've never heard about it. That will work well until they get hacked. And now that the information is out there, that will be sooner rather than later. And we wind up with, a polluted water supply or something like that. And then, kind of all hell will break loose. But we shall see. In the reference section, the FBI is warning of the risk related to unpatched. Now they're calling it medical devices, which is fair, but it's unpatched IoT and industrial IoT devices. And these things are everywhere. They are, they're in office buildings. They're just everywhere, is whether it's an elevator controller, it's an air conditioning controller, it's a telephone controller, alarms, cameras, not to mention all the day-to-day stuff. So, they're everywhere. The vendors are really slow to announce that that there's vulnerabilities and that they have patches for it, and customers are very slow to actually patch it because these are things that don't have someone sitting in front of them looking at it. They're hidden in a closet somewhere, and it becomes a real problem. In the important issues section, this is really a really important issue. We saw recently that that there was an attack. It was the Uber attack, is what it was. That was caused because there were hard-coded admin level passwords. Now the bad guys had already gotten in, but then they were able to move laterally because in the Slack environment there were some PowerShell scripts that had admin passwords hard-coded into the scripts. That's a really, really bad strategy. And the question becomes, where are all these passwords and how are you managing them? And are you hard coding them and things? And we've also seen things like hard coded passwords being uploaded to GitHub and being available to hackers that way. So it's really important to get your hands around where your passwords are and how they're being stored and how you're securing them. Also in the important issues, and again, no patch here, apparently Microsoft Teams stores your authorization tokens in the clear on the PC. So if the bad guys figured out how to get onto the PC, then they can steal the tokens and reuse them until they time out. Now, Microsoft says, they don't plan to fix this anytime soon. My guess is they're going to get a rash and shit over that, and they're going to fix it. But right now they're not, and their suggestion is, well, just don't use the apps. If you want to use Teams, use the web version of Teams. And people aren't going to do that. So, and there is no workaround that I'm aware of. So, I think it's a bit of a mess. In a legislature and legal world, the U.S. is announced it is stepping up its export sanctions on China for semiconductors. This is both chips and chip making equipment. This is kind of in line with I don't know if it's directly related to it, but it's in line with the requirements of the Chip and Science Act of 2022, which allocated $50 billion to make the U.S. Chip industry better. The chip makers, of course, are whining that, well, we just want to take that money and give it to China, and the administration is having nothing to do with that. That's not going to fly. So apparently, we're going to increase, not only continue, but we're going to increase the sanctions against China for this chip technology, which they desperately want. The challenge is, of course, if we give it to them, they will beat us badly because they don't need to make a profit, and the government will give the Chinese industry billions of dollars with no strings attached. So we really do have to keep this tech out of their hands to the degree that we can. Many of you probably are aware that there is a national privacy law bill working its way through Congress. I'd say the odds of passing are, this is an election year, so they don't got a hell of a lot more time. Maybe, 50% if you're really optimistic. But I have a link in the newsletter to a panel discussion from Georgetown law professor Dan Solov with a bunch of other really smart people talking about the pros and cons of the bill. And I'm kind of undecided at this point. I don't like the fact that it preempts state law. I think that's the bad thing. What that means is that rather than federal law being a floor, federal law will be a ceiling. So nobody can have better privacy and security rules than whatever Congress manages to negotiate. I think that's bad law, and we don't do that in other sectors. So I'm not sure why we do that here. So anyway, but if you're interested in that's a great hour-long webinar. In the breaches section, an entire Kentucky town was knocked off the internet due to a cyber attack. The town of Bardstown, which is also known as the bourbon capital of the world, was knocked off the weekend, knocked off the internet over Labor Day weekend. It's a small town, like 13,000 people. They only have one internet provider. It got hit by a cyber attack, and they were offline for about 18 hours. They were able to get things back online after that, but the stores all lost their Labor Day revenue, so they weren't terribly happy about that. And an update on the Texas Oak Bend Medical Center, which got hit a couple of weeks ago. They are still struggling to come back online. The hackers claim to have stolen, among other data of 1.2 million patients. So it's a big breach. Obviously, they're being careful. Apparently, they now have their phones working, but not their voicemail. And patients' records are still being done by hand, which, even though everybody says, oh, that doesn't have any impact on patient safety, I'm kind of thinking, well, if it doesn't have any impact on patient safety, then why are you spending all this money on systems? So that doesn't make any sense to me. But the point is that it takes a long time to go off and recover from these things, and this is just yet another example of that. In the daily blog post, rather, some lawyers, let's be fair here, not all, some lawyers have figured out that staying within the confines of the law is not necessary, and they're hiring third-party private investigators to go off and break into things, steal emails and stuff like that. Apparently, there is a pretty good cottage industry of folks that are doing this. It's at an arm's length because the lawyer's not doing it, the private investigator's not doing it. There is some third party in some strange part of the world that's doing it, and they claim plausible deniability. It didn't quite work in one particular case, but that doesn't mean that it's not being done in other cases. Next, Apple has eliminated the SIM card, which is the personality card for phones in the iPhone 14. It's being done virtually inside the phone on the circuit board. This has some pluses and minuses. The biggest minus, and this is important to understand if you plan on buying an iPhone 14 or if you plan on changing carriers, is some carriers are not able to handle this virtual SIM card. And if you get an iPhone 14, you may have to change phone carriers because that carrier can't handle the virtual SIM card. Next, the White House has issued, or OMB has issued, more guidelines for agencies and contractors for how to comply with the cybersecurity executive order. It's going to affect a lot of people. And I think what's going to happen, I've said this before, is we're going to see as this thing gets more firm that large companies are going to say, this is a great standard. We don't need to go reinvent the wheel. We're just going to use this standard, and we expect you to comply with this if you want to do business with us. And you don't have to comply with this, but we'll find a vendor that does. So this is going to affect a lot more than just agencies and contractors. And obviously, contractors are going to go off and say their suppliers have to comply with it as well. So we got at the beginning of this thing, we've got agencies, contractors, their suppliers, and then vendors to other companies. So I think this is going to be a big deal over time. And lastly, in the security news bite section, one more time, a vendor has admitted that their hardware is buggy, and guess what? They're not going to fix it. So now you're in a position where the bugs are out there, the bad guys know about it, it's easy to scan whether you've got this hardware or not, and then your choice is either to throw away the hardware and replace it, and likely the hardware is end of life in that situation, but still, it's working. And so the vendor is really putting people between a rock and a hard place. Google has completed their $5 billion all-cash purchase of Mandiant. We shall see where that goes. I think they will probably pretty much leave it alone because it's a cash cow, and they don't want to blow it up. Microsoft has issued their last and final warning about authentication changes. They're getting rid of basic authentication into the Office 365 environment. So if you are an Exchange user and you're still using basic authentication, come October 1st, that is not going to work anymore. Going back to Mandiant again, they say that North Korea is spreading Trojanized software, which is kind of cool. Well, not if you're a victim. But what they're doing is they're socially engineering people to download a new version. In their case, it's PuTTY, which is a command and control software that admins use, but it could be any software. And this is, in that sense, it's not new, other than this is an active campaign. But what they're doing is they're getting people, by social engineering them, to download and install infected software. So and of course, the admins are the people who this is targeted against, and they're the ones who have the rights to go install software. So this is important that your admins really watch out and take care, because otherwise they will wind up being the cause of a cyber attack. And lastly, a botched cyber attack turns physical. Attacker wanted a cryptocurrency speculator to turn over their phone, unlock it, and empty their crypto wallet. Apparently, the person refused, and they physically attacked the person. But that didn't work out so well for the attackers, because some nosy neighbors saw them, reported them to the police, and the police were able to pick up the bad guys there in jail. But this whole cyber physical interface is becoming more real, and certainly I anticipate that we'll see more attacks, and we have seen some others like this before. We'll see more attacks like this in the future, so people should be careful about that. And partly the guy in question, was bragging on social media about his crypto conquests, and I think that's, to be really blunt, quite dumb, and don't do that. So that's all I have. Again, if you need help figuring out how to deal with this work from anywhere risk problem, please reach out to us. If you have any other cybersecurity issues, please reach out to us. And until next time, thanks for listening.
Turnkey Cybersecurity and Privacy Solutions offers the complete cybersecurity program for small to medium-sized businesses. They include everything needed to secure your business and meet compliance requirements. Visit our website at turnkeycybersecurityandprivacysolutions.com to learn more.